Welcome to the latest episode of The Claus Corner. Today's guest began tap dancing on the streets of Hollywood all the way to Broadway performances as a young teenager, where he grew up in the world of theater. He appeared in Peter Pan with Mary Martin and Cyril Ritchard and achieved the rare feat of playing in top productions of West Side Story in both New York and London before the age of 20. He then went on to play Tiger in the 1961 film version starring Natalie Wood. 6 decades later, the great Steven Spielberg chose him for a cameo in the remake of West Side Story. In 2021, he released the book, When You Are a Jet, the story of a dancer's extraordinary, ordinary life, where he talks about this and everything else he has ever done in his amazing life. So without further ado, please welcome the amazing David Tiger Bean to the Claus Corner. David, how are you?
Well, I feel like a jet.
Do you feel like singing like a jet?
But it was a wonderful intro. You did a beautiful job. And I'm humbled by it. But I'm still a jet. All the way.
A lifelong jet. And you know what? You have such an amazing life. I met you not too long ago at the Chiller Theater in New Jersey, and it was instant. You and I just started talking, and we probably would still be talking if you didn't have to go home and I didn't have to go home. There was just so many things about our life in general, of like how you live your life and how my perception of life and how I live it were very, very similar. And it was so great to meet you. And I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Simpatico, that's what that's called. And that's wonderful.
Or as your wife said earlier, 2 idiots.
Well, she's my main cynic, you know, that she puts everything in perspective and puts us back down on earth.
You know, everybody needs that. I like that, you know, the yin and yang.
I don't know if it's too early to start telling stories, but we do have our life has been incredibly inspirational because everything we do at 180%.
Oh yeah, well, I want to talk about that. We are going to talk about, I went through that book with a fine-tooth comb, and there were so many things I wrote down because I do not want to leave anything out. But before we get into the stories, I want to start in the very beginning, because the book starts with a bang. It has a foreword by Michael Corda. Who is that? Michael
Corda is probably one of the premier writers of the 21st century and 20th century now. He wrote Queenie. He's written so many things. He was also CEO of Simon & Schuster in New York. So he's a big name in the writing world. And he lives not far from us. And being born in Britain, he frequented our store, which carries British food. And that's how we met about 30 years ago. And so we've had this repartee for years and years and years. Lord knows I had no intention of ever writing a book. That just came out. And Michael was a great help once I wrote it.
Yeah. Well, you definitely had a lot to say because you lived such an amazing life, as I mentioned in the intro. And we're going to get into everything, but I want to go back because in the prologue, I'm going to start right at the very, very beginning of the book. It states, what a difference a day makes. So tell me what was so special about July 14th, 2019. We'll start with that.
July 14th, that's Bastille Day, actually. July 14th, I was transported to New York City. Mm-hmm. Actually, the 13th, and given I had a hotel room in New York City and a driver to take me up to Harlem, where Steven Spielberg was shooting West Side Story, the second edition of the movie. And that's when I did the cameo for his production of West Side Story.
Yeah. And what scene were you? You was it America, is that correct?
Well, yes. When Anita, Ariana DuBois, comes down the street singing America, I like to be in America, right? Well, she passes my fabric shop. I'm the owner of a fabric shop that spills out onto the street on 138th Street in Harlem. And she had bought a piece of material from me. So when she gets to me, she has to sign the credit card or chit or whatever it is that she signs. And then she whisks off. It's a 15-second cameo.
Yeah.
But I'm very honored to be there to do that.
Oh, definitely. And Spielberg said something interesting because in the scene, they look very angrily at you. And back in the day, in real life, he was telling you that when a shopkeeper would see a Puerto Rican or somebody of color, they would charge them double. And that's why in the scene they're singing and they're giving you a dirty look as they're walking by.
That's what happened. Yes. And he did. It's amazing. This man is just absolutely, totally immersed in research.
Mhm.
And basically, when I was in makeup, I was, and they were doing my hair and plastering it down. And I looked up and I went, oh my God, they parted my hair. I said, it's my hair, it's parted. Well, we think, and Mr. Spielberg thinks that's apropos for the mid 50s, early 50s look. And I said, but my hair hasn't been parted since 1947. I said, it's very strange to me.
That's funny.
We all laughed, but literally, I was dressed with a tie and I had a little pocket watch, and the detail was just spectacular.
Yeah. I have a friend that's been an extra in some of the movies with Spielberg, and she said the same thing too. Her scenes were cut out. I think it was called The Paper. I'm not sure what the movie was with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. And she said she was in makeup, just doing her hair for probably 3 hours for a scene that took 3 seconds that she wasn't even in. But yeah, she said he's so meticulous with everything he does, it pays attention to detail for every little thing that probably a lot of people watching the movie will never even notice, but he wants it to be just like that. And I love that about him. I've always been a fan of Spielberg all the way back from Jaws I started off with, and then Duel I went back, and then I started Close Encounters is one of my all-time favorite movies. And so yeah, I've seen probably every single movie he's ever done. And even if I don't like the movie, I just like the way it's done. I mean, it's very rarely a movie that I don't like that he's done, but some I like better than others.
This continues because right after I did the makeup and everything, they were satisfied with how I looked and where I was going. And they said, listen, Spielberg right now on 137th Street is filming part of the prologue with the dancers. Would you like to see it? Well, the question was thought out because I think he wanted me to go down there. And I sat in the booth and I watched him do a 16-bar sequence. And when it was finished, I walked out onto the street. Well, all the dancers came running around and they all knew who I was. Well, that was Spielberg. He must have told them that I was going to be there. And obviously they grew up watching West Side Story, all their young lives. So it wasn't, they had lots of questions. I was inundated with questions. It was wonderful. And Spielberg pushed through the crowd and I had yet to meet him. And he came up and he poked me and said, you're David Bean. He said, Tiger. I said, yes, I am. He said, well, we have a problem. I said, really? What's the problem? He said, well, we have a new Tiger. We're going to have to call you Old Tiger now. So for the rest of the day, he called me Old Tiger. He said, but listen, he said, your first Broadway show was Peter Pan with Mary Martin and Cyril Ritchard. He said, did you know Cyril Ritchard? He said, because that man was the best Captain Hook ever. He said, I did a movie called Hook with Dustin Hoffman. He said, I fashioned his character after Cyril Ritchard's performance in the play you did with him back in the mid 50s.
Yeah.
I was floored because and then he went on to talk about other things that I had done. He did his homework. He knew exactly who I was.
Yeah.
And it was flattering. It was very flattering. And I said to him, Cyril Ritchard actually was not just a co-worker. I said, he and his wife sort of adopted me and I sort of grew up with him the rest of my life until right up until he died. I said, he was like a father to me. And I said, I had just finished writing my memoirs. And I said, I have a manuscript that I've written and there's a lot about Cyril Ritchard in that manuscript. He said, well, I have to have it. He said, you send that to me. I want to read it. So I did. And of course, like you mentioned early on in this interview, the book opens with what a difference a day makes.
Yeah.
And of course, that day was when a gentleman came into the store and chatted with me. I will tell you the story in a minute, but because I don't want to get off the point. Now I did get off the point. I have a quick wit and a very slow brain. You know that, don't you?
Again, that's why we get along so well.
But Cyril literally was, again, almost like a father to me. And what happened was, I wrote about it. So I'm getting off key here now. I had something really special to say, and I can't remember what it was.
Well, we can always get back to that because I wanted to mention him because I know what a father figure. I mean, he's done so much for you, helped you out in your career, he even helped your father at one time in the very beginning because your father was unemployed or lost his job, and he helped him out too. So I mean, he's been involved in your life.
Well, now that we're talking about Cyril and Peter Pan, that was I was 14 years old when I got the audition for Peter Pan, and I was living in California, and I auditioned in California for Peter Pan, which was rare. Who auditions for a Broadway show in LA? And basically, we all came to New York after San Francisco and LA. We came to New York and settled down. Well, Cyril and his wife, Maddie, unbeknownst to me or probably anybody that knew them at the time, they had a child who was born the same year I was that didn't survive. And so basically it's a normal thing to think that I sort of walked into their lives. And they would invite me back between shows on Wednesday matinee or a Saturday matinee. And as we all, as a family, came to New York, two of my sisters and my mom and dad, we lived in Jackson Heights. And Dad went to get a job driving a truck. He was a junk man at home. He drove trucks. Well, he couldn't. They were on strike. Just so happened that Cyril's dresser became ill and had to leave. And Cyril was talking about it in one of the crossovers during the show. And I said to him, "You ought to ask my dad to help because he can't get a job now." And he did.
Wow.
My dad became Cyril's dresser, which was phenomenal because here's a man that I am positive has never washed out a pair of his own socks in his life, was doing Cyril's, all his underwear and his socks and his wigs, combing his wigs and doing, it was brilliant. And so it became really a family affair. And Cyril, anytime, years beyond that, when he would go to California to do a show for the Civic Light Opera, my dad would quit his job and dress Cyril.
Wow.
And then have to go find another job. It was spectacular. It was
no, I love that. Going through the book, I mean, he helped you out so much, and he always saw something in you and he wanted to help you out, and he did. I want to get back to West Side Story for a minute. We're going to go back to Cyril and so many other things. But what I loved about that story when you were watching them rehearse was because, as you were saying, when you filmed your movie in 1961, you had the music blaring through the streets and they're dancing to it. You're watching them rehearse and there's no music playing at all. Then you realize that they had earbuds because you're like, it just seemed so funny to you as they're dancing down the street with no music playing. And
well, actually, the first, when after we rehearsed it a couple of times with Ariana Du Bois, she came down the street and everything, and there was, we sort of blocked it through. Yeah. And they said, "All right, we'll have a take." He said, "Quiet," and then they did the clapper, the time. And she came down the street, and I couldn't hear anything, and all of a sudden she turned around and right in my face she said, "I'd like to be," and she started singing, and I jumped back, and they said, "Cut." I had no idea that they were in literally doing the song because they all had earbuds and I didn't, and I had no idea they were going to jump into that song. It was very funny. So Stephen said, "Either we get you an earbud or watch her out the corner of your eye because get ready for it. She's going to sing at your face."
Did you end up getting an earbud or did you just go?
No, well, then I was conscious of it, so I could watch it.
That's funny. I want to go back to David Bean, the early years, all the way back to age 3. You had polio.
I did.
Did it affect you very much?
Well, yeah, I was paralyzed pretty much from my neck down.
I would say that that's a big effect. So
Yeah, but
how,
no,
how long were you paralyzed?
I don't, I actually, if you ask me, I don't remember. any
What'd
of
your
it.
what'd your parents tell you?
3 to 4. I have 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters. I'm the baby.
Yeah.
My mother had taken my brother Donald, my oldest brother Donald, into the General Hospital in downtown LA for a checkup because he wasn't feeling well. Well, there was no such thing as babysitters in those days, not for us anyway. And so she took me, and I had a seizure in the hospital while she was holding me.
Wow.
And I was admitted right away. There was an epidemic in LA at that time, so getting me out of the hospital was paramount. And they trained my 3 older brothers, my mom and dad, how to repack the Sister Kenny treatment, which was hot packs. And they come and go every hour, 24 hours a day, because it's a muscular disease. And the hot packs did the work. And they did that. And then exercise and stretch. And they did that. I know no one's ever actually told me how many months they carried on, but it was probably just under a year. So I was 4 and a half.
Wow.
And I came out of it. Mother was a pianist, and she played piano for a dance teacher. And I started taking tap dancing lessons, and just to strengthen my legs, because I was tiny. I started 9th grade. I was still only 5 feet tall.
Wow.
I grew 9.5 inches in my high school years.
Well, I think that's how you and I first bonded, because I was telling you my story. I was born with cerebral palsy, given the last rites 3 times. They said I would never walk, never talk. Even the doctor said to me not too long ago, he goes, I can't believe you're here talking because you should be a vegetable. For the most part, it's probably not this easily explained, but the left side controls the right side controls the left. So basically the whole left side of my brain is completely dead. But because it happened right when I was born, the right side overcompensated for the left. So I luckily, the only thing that was affected with me was my right hand and my right leg. So I had, just like you growing up, I wasn't paralyzed, but I used to wear a brace, and they had to go for several operations. I was walking on my toe, and they don't really say anymore, but I love when people say, oh, I feel bad. It's like, don't feel bad. I said, I actually have it really, really good. And I've never, ever let it get in the way. I've done so many different things, not in the level that you have, but I've written books, done stand-up comedy, motivational talks. Now I'm doing my podcast. So I have that. That's why I love talking to you when I first met you, because you and I have that mentality. It's like, no, I'm not going to be the victim. I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to conquer it. And I was so impressed with that story when you told me.
Well, bravo to you, because you were cognizant of the fact that this was going on. Where in my instance, it's my family that are the heroes.
Yeah.
And they brought me out of it. And of course, the fact that my mother introduced me to dance at a very early age and helped me with the passion for what I was doing. I mean, I came home from school. No one ever had to tell me to put my tap shoes on and practice, because I did it. And I was a very good tap dancer. There's no question about that. I loved it. But this is part and parcel of what our whole life is about. My dad was a junk man at the time, in those years growing up. And he would go and collect junk, all the way to Beverly Hills. They would knock on doors and say, we can clean out your basement. And my brothers would jump on the truck and fill it and bring it home. We had a tent in the back, and we sold clothes. And of course, Dad was a junk man. We tinkered in the back. I had an anvil, and we separated the brass and copper together. And it was a glorious time. But Dad, and this is a wonderful story, and it's in the book, but it's very true. he would say to me, Dave, I got a job for you. Well, getting a job with my dad was really exciting because I had 3 older brothers. They generally would always get the job. And of course, we never did anything for money because there wasn't any, but we did it because there was a chance to please him. And this was just beautiful. So I said, Dad, what's the job? Before I give you this job, Dave, he says, I got to tell you, he said, this is going to be a pretty important job. And I know you're going to give me 100%. No, Dad, I'm going to give you 125. What's the job? What's the job? Can I get the job? Yeah, that's just what I wanted to hear, he'd say. Good for you. He says, good, I wanted to hear it. He says, you know, but I've been thinking, this is really a special job. He says, I just may need 150. Dad, I'll give you 180. How's that? 180. And I'd get the job. Well, 180 has become our family motto. It's our household rule. If you're willing to put 180% into any passion that you find coming out of you, I guarantee you success. Titles don't mean anything. It's the passion you have and what you put into it that's going to be your success. And that is that's our whole life. We don't do anything. And now I can go back to my wife being the lovely cynic. That people will say, how is it that you have so much energy? He said, at your age, I have all this energy. I said, well, when I get up in the morning and my feet hit the floor, I tap dance. I get a little rhythm going.
Yep.
And I can feel that energy coming right through my body, and it comes right up my back, and I actually stand up. You'll never see me say, oh God, how am I going to get through this day? Never happened. I stand up. My wife says, yes, he does that. He does that. He gets that rhythm going, and he feels it going right through his body, and he stands straight up. And by the time he gets to the toilet, he really knows why he's there.
I'm just glad you make it to the toilet. That's funny. Yeah, you call it the 180 rule. I love that. Just do it with passion, do it 180%. So did you come from a musical family?
Well, mother was a pianist, a brilliant pianist. She taught dad to play, so they did duets, polka and things like that. She taught me to play 5 songs, which I can still play today. My sister and I were a dance team when I was about 9, 10, and 11. And my oldest brother, Don, played the trombone. Jerry played the French horn. Roberta played the violin very badly. And Janet and I danced. And we all sang, but Doug didn't do anything. But if you brought a brown paper bag with a hole right where the mouth is, put it over his head, he'd sing for you. And that was our Saturday night in our house was brilliant. It was just the best place to be in the whole world every Saturday night. Well, in the 40s and 50s, we didn't have television. Heck, I was on television way before we ever owned one. All the local variety shows, the Spade Cooley show, I was on tap dancing. And it was just a very exciting time. Our house on Saturday night was the place to be.
I love it.
Everybody entertained.
I think your whole family would make a great variety show. Like, they had the Captain Tennille, the Osmonds, the Jacksons.
Yeah, it was
beans.
Don went on. He was the only one that went on to do anything musical, and he played the trombone in the El Camino College marching band. Mm-hmm. And every Thanksgiving, we would go to Grandma's house in Gardena, California for Thanksgiving, and we would all go to the game. And then after the game, have dinner at Grandma's house. But Don would be marching in the band, and he played the trombone very well.
I love it. So did your mother and father realize that you were taking tap dancing very seriously, and then they got you in touch with Melvin Kaiser?
Well, no, mother taught for, she played for Melvin Kaiser.
Oh, okay.
And that was pretty much my first tap teacher. And after about 3 years, he said to my mother, I can't teach David anymore. You have to send him to North Hollywood to a man called Eddie Gay, who then was teaching Vera Ellen and Ann Miller and Donald O'Connor and all the movie industry.
Yeah.
And so I did. Mom drove me to Hollywood and 3 times a week, and I was in class with all these people. And literally, it was Melvin Kaiser was my first dance teacher. He sent me out 2 times a week forever. For the whole time I was with him, we would play at the Norwalk Hospital. We'd perform at a bar. Anywhere they would have us, we would play. It didn't matter. It just, as long as there was a piano and mom could play, and we were dancing on the back of a 18-wheeler flatbed truck in the middle of the Pomona Fair. It was spectacular that we just always were dancing somewhere. When I got to Eddie Gay in North Hollywood, he didn't send anybody out anywhere. But he said to my parents, he said, there is an audition in Hollywood for a show, and I think you should take David for this audition. And he gave her the particulars and everything. Well, my mother had to go to San Diego's to play actually it was Del Mar, the Del Mar Hotel. She was playing in the bar there. So she couldn't drive me to this audition in Hollywood, but my dad did. And I said to my dad, Dad, what's an audition? I said, what is it what are they going to ask me? He said, well, Dave, he says, you know, when you and I are on the back of the truck and we're dinging doorbells and collecting junk. I said, yeah. And I yell up to you. I says, hey, Dave, come down here and bring your tap shoes. This guy wants to see you dance. Which is what I did all the time. We carried my tap shoes in the car and the truck. And I would dance anywhere for anybody at any time. It's spontaneous.
Yeah.
I got rhythm. I got beauty. We'd knock it out in a minute.
I love it.
My dad said to me, you know, when you do that, when I ask you to jump down off the truck and dance for somebody, I said, yeah. He said, that's an audition. Wow. That was a brilliant thing to tell me, because when I went into this audition, and strangely enough, the guy giving the audition was Jerome Robbins. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, I owned that audition because my dad told me just to do what I do normally. It was second nature to me to go up and do something at 180%.
Yeah.
And that, I worked for Jerry for over 8 years after that, because I never marked anything. It was always out there at 180%. He loved that. Anybody who gave Cheetah Rivera is spit an image of the 180% rule. This woman just didn't stop. He loved her. You never heard Jerome Robbins say a bad word about Cheetah Rivera, but it's because she worked hard. He never said, I've never heard him say anything to me that was nasty or funny, because I gave him as much.
Uh-oh. The power just went out.
All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim.
What's a diaphragm again?
Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.
Waiting around for autumn. Waiting around for autumn. I was watching the TV. I was watching the TV. Yeah. Waiting around for winter. Waiting around for winter. I was watching the TV.
And we are back. We had a little bit of a glitch there. A tree fell on a wire.
Something came up on the screen here.
Okay.
Now I can't, it blocks your face, so I'm gonna take it off.
Okay.
There we
Yeah, that
go.
happens every so often. So John's the editor, the great John Bristol of M1 Productions. Please splice this together. But so David, we had a little bit of a problem here where a tree happened to fall on a wire in the middle of our conversation. So record the first part. Now we're going to go back into it. Where we left off, you were talking about how Jerome Robbins never had anything bad to say. I think there was one thing in the book you said, out of all the years you've known him, there was only one time he was a little bit perturbed at you. What happened then?
Actually, we were doing a dress rehearsal for the cast of The King and I. And in the second act, underground scene is when all the Lost Boys come into the show. Wendy flies in, the Wendy bird, and she says, poor Wendy, and we shoot her with an arrow. Well, it hits her locket, luckily.
Yes.
Only in theater. And she survives, but Peter doesn't want to move her. Well, technically, before she flies in, all the Lost Boys are there and they're bantering about, and I start to brag that all the other Lost Boys Peter had to name them. But my mother had wrote my name on the shirt that I was lost in. As the fable goes, that if you're lost more than 7 days at birth and not found, you're sent to Never Never Land without a name. So Peter has to name you. But my mother wrote my name on the shirt that I was lost in. Slightly soiled. That's my name. Anyway, well, I had made a mistake when I was in the oratory. And I went, oh, I grimaced. Well, I thought Jerry was going to have a heart attack. He ripped me a new what, and said, but that's the only time. Well, I deserved it because it was so unprofessional for me to do what I did. But I was 14 years old and I really deserved it. But that's the only time Jerry ever said anything negative to me, harsh.
Yeah, and you've had a long career with him, so that's very impressive.
He was harsh to a lot of people because they deserved it.
Yeah.
On occasion, I think in the original Broadway show, Mickey Callan was one of Jerry's pets that he picked on him a lot. And if Jerry didn't like you, it wasn't not much you could do about it. He would pick on you. And he was evil in that respect. I saw him do that on several people.
I'm glad he liked you.
Yes, he did.
Well, there's a lot of interesting stories about Peter Pan and all the different people you've met. I want to go into one story right now, because I love this story. You had your hair cut by the world's most famous barber.
Didn't I? Yes. We were rehearsing in New York, and this was prior to opening on Broadway. And Mary Martin grabbed a hold of me, grabbed my arm. She said, come with me. We have to find an empty room. I'm going to cut your hair, because my hair was getting very long and it was very red. I was a genuine redhead. And so we were walking down the hall and she was trying the doors to find an empty rehearsal room so that she could sit there and comb my hair. And Perry Como walks out into the aisle. I said, hello, dear, how are you? And they said they had an exchange. I said, where are you going? She said, well, I'm trying to find an empty room. I want to cut David's hair. She said, really? He said, well, I only sing for fun. I'm actually a barber. And he took me in and cut my hair. They fought over it a little bit.
That's funny. And also you met a lot of interesting people in that play. One person in particular was Vice President Ritchard Nixon.
Yes. That was an interesting night. He was ushered backstage and all of the Lost Boys were in one room together. And he was brought in with his entourage. And every one of us kids were introduced to him. David Bean, this is Mr. Ritchard Nixon. And then he went right on down the line. right? Well, the next night, Richard Nixon came again, but he brought Tricia and his wife to see the show, not the gang. And again, they were brought up, and he was brought into our dressing room, and Richard Nixon introduced every one of us by name to his wife and daughter.
Wow.
Without a pad. This is David, this is all the way down the line. I thought, wow, that's really good. But on the way up to the dressing room at the Winter Garden is from the stage door to the first floor is about 45 steps. It's a long staircase going up to the first floor. And at the bottom of that staircase, every night, my mother would stand waiting for me to come down after the show so that we could take the subway back to Jackson Heights, where we were living. Well, Richard Nixon had just finished doing this miraculous thing, and he came out down the staircase. He went straight up to my mother and said, "It was a wonderful show. You were brilliant. Thank you very much." Right?
You do good impression.
It blew all this other things I've done. Well, my mother wasn't even in the show.
That's right. We went to a funny story about Richard Nixon. I interviewed Victoria Price, who was Vincent Price's daughter. And she was saying that when first time, I guess her father was doing something with him. I forgot what it was. And she was a kid. She did not want to meet him. She goes, "I don't like him." And he goes, "You will have respect for the office. I don't care who it is." She ended up meeting him. She said he was the nicest guy in the world to her, and she apologized to her father. She goes, "I'm sorry," but yeah, he was really good to her as well. She had a very similar story with him.
Well, he was a gentleman. It was super fun and all that, but I can't imagine why he went down to my mother, who had nothing to do with the show.
That's funny.
You mentioned Vincent Price. Cyril Ritchard was very close to, and I know her name like I know my own now. She married Vincent Price.
Oh yeah, you know what? I did that interview several years ago. We talked about that. I think I forgot what her name was because they met at a play.
Exactly. Coral Brown.
Yes.
Coral Brown. Well, Coral Brown and I in London when I was 17, we would go. I would take her out to dinner because she was a friend of Cyril's, and we'd go to a horror movie. She loved horror movies. Hello, event, 35 years later, she married Vincent Price, the epitome of a horror movie. And I do understand. I thought they had, from what I understand, they had a wonderful marriage.
Yeah, that's what she was saying too. And you know what? We'll stick on this for a bit because he impressed me so much because I did not realize similar to you, what a Renaissance man he was. He did so many different things with art, but she was saying that he actually liked being a character actor more than a lead actor. He loved playing the bad guy, but he really didn't care about carrying the film. He just loved being, and she actually likes the film noirs that he did earlier than the horror movies. She really doesn't even like the horror movies. And she said he had so much more fun doing that than he did the horror stuff. But he said the funniest thing was they had for The Fly, help me. They had to redo that scene over and over again because he could not stop laughing during that.
I can imagine that happened in the filming of West Side. Tragically, at the very end of the movie, when we go down and we pick Tony up and he's gone, he's been shot, right? He's dead, and we walk off, and that's the end of the movie. Well, if you look closely, our bodies are shaking because Natalie Wood is off camera and making faces at us. And somebody was being interviewed, and he said, Robert Wise, the director, approached a couple of the kids after we cut the scene. He said, "It's amazing how emotional you guys still get over this." We weren't emotional, we were laughing.
That's funny.
But it seemed like to him, he thought we were crying, but we weren't.
One thing I found out in the book, I want to talk about Natalie Wood since you mentioned her, was that I was surprised and she was kind of disappointed in this, that she did not do her own singing.
Disappointed is not the phrase I'd use. She was pissed.
Yeah, okay.
She worked really hard on it, and they did record all of her stuff, her singing it, and it wasn't terrible. She did a really adequate job, but Marnie did a brilliant job.
Yeah. No, I rewatched it again the other night, and that movie never ever gets old. It's such a classic, and it will always be a classic. I love it.
Marnie Nixon did a lot of things. She also was the voice for My Fair Lady, where Audrey Hepburn. She sang that whole movie. I don't know if you remember, there was a movie called An Affair to Remember.
I never saw it, but I know of it.
Okay, well, Deborah Carr is supposed to meet her lover up on top of the Empire State Building, and as she's looking up, she's crossing the street, she gets hit by a car and is hurt. So, and never makes it to the rendezvous that they were going to have. And you don't make a lot of noise, you point killer. And,
Wants to be on the show as well.
yes, theater dog. So he takes, who was it? Was it Cary? Who was it in The Fair to Remember the Man? Cary Grant? No?
Oh, that lovely one where they meet in the Louvre?
Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever his name was, he's very famous. Anyway, he takes her to Italy before all of this and meets his mother. And his mother sings this wonderful song. That's Marnie Nixon. That goes back to the early 50s when that movie was made.
You know what's funny? It almost reminds me of the movie Singing in the Rain, where Debbie Reynolds is singing behind the scenes and everybody thinks it's the actress. And it wasn't until the very end. Did she ever, similar to Singing in the Rain, did she ever have a career of her own singing, or was she always just behind the scenes singing for actors?
Marnie, only behind the scenes.
Okay.
She did have a film about her life that she narrated. She brought it to Poughkeepsie, and we saw it here in Poughkeepsie. Actually, I'm in it in some of the film segments that she used. But she did some similar things like that. She did a couple of Broadway shows, but she was never a star.
Yeah.
She never was given that opportunity to come out. And I think one of the most wonderful stories about her was that when the record came out, it sold $1 billion worth of records, and she didn't get a penny.
It's sad.
She was under contract, she was paid for the day, and that was that. Well, she sued them and lost. She lost because she was under contract to do. She did what she did. Leonard Bernstein gave her 0.5% of his royalties.
Wow.
As a gift. Made her a millionaire. It took care of her for the rest of her life.
Good. Well, I'm glad it worked out for her. I mean, I understand that she signed the contract and nobody knew it was going to take off the way it did, probably. But you know, I'm glad that she did get what she deserved. So I'm happy for that. And Leonard, seems like such a great guy from different stories I've read.
What a stand-up guy Leonard Bernstein was to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard other people mention him, and they all said the same thing too. He seems like a really, really great guy, and I'm so glad he did that. I want to go back though, because we were talking about people you met during Peter Pan. Another person I was really impressed with was that you met Helen Keller.
Oh, it was a spectacular night. Mary Martin invited all the Lost Boys into her dressing room and introduced us to Helen Keller. And she said, now, what we want to do is that each of you can ask her a question. Really? She's deaf and she can't see. Hello? How did we get in? So Helen Keller came up and put her fingers on my lips. And I, of course, beautifully precocious child, said to her, if you're in the audience and you can't see, and you can't hear, how do you know what's going on? I thought that was a really good question from a 14-year-old boy. And she said, vibrations. She understood every word I said.
Wow,
With her fingers on my mouth.
that's amazing. How old was she back then when you met her? How old was she? Was she older?
50.
Okay.
50.
Wow. That's impressive.
Oh, I was on the floor. I thought, oh, wow. That was, and then she went down every boy. Some of them couldn't think of any questions. but it was, and the irony is that she was blind, but she had eyes, and her whole face was just radiant. It wasn't as though this little old lady. She was right there. I was really impressed with this woman.
Yeah, I'm impressed with her too.
And there's a continuing story. Later in life, Jean and I owned an art gallery in Westchester. And Jennifer was, I think, 8 or 9 years old. And we got the biography of Helen Keller. And while I was making frames and selling stuff, in the art gallery, Jennifer was sitting on my counter because it was all carpeted because of the artwork stuff. Every day after school, she'd come back and read a chapter from Helen Keller's story. And I could tell her that, so it was kind of neat to read that to me. Yeah.
Came full circle. I love it. Now, so after Peter Pan ended, what was next for you?
When Peter Pan ended, I went back to California to go into high school. And strangely enough, 2 things happened in high school when I was there for the first year that I was there. One, I did 2 musicals in the Players Ring Theater in West Hollywood. One was Heidi. The story, I played Peter the Goatherd, and it was a musical. And the other was Johnny Appleseed, which I was Johnny Appleseed in the musical. And they were weekend plays in the round for children primarily. Mostly adults came to see it because they were wonderful productions. I'm not sure if you remember the woman Kathleen Freeman in Singing in the Rain. She was the one who was the diction coach.
Oh, yeah.
That was Kathleen Freeman. Well, she went into New York. The last thing she did in New York, which she won a Tony for, was the Full Monty. And she wanted to, and then she passed shortly after that. But Kathleen Freeman wrote both of those plays and the lyrics to the songs. She didn't write the music, but she wrote the script and the lyrics to all the songs. Talented lady.
Yeah.
Well, I did that on the weekends, but in school I was introduced to. They said I had to have a fine art. I said, I beg your pardon? A fine art? I just got off Broadway for a year and a half. What are you talking about? I need a fine art. She said, so they put me into a printing class to learn printing. Well, I had no idea what they were talking about and everything. However, when I went into the class, I loved the smell of the ink and I took to it, and it's part of my body. Printing is a big part of my life. And that was one thing that happened. And the other was my gym coach, because I had long hair. I was Johnny Appleseed and I had long hair. He said, you got to go get a haircut before you come back to class. I said, well, I'm doing a play and it's required that I have long hair. And he said, well, I don't want any queers in my class.
Oh my God.
He said that.
Wow.
And he said, get out of my class. He said, if you don't get a haircut, I don't want you here. Get out. So I had to go back to the counselor, and she said, well, don't pay any attention to him. I'll put you into you go into a gymnastics class.
Oh, man.
You run the gymnastics team. You don't have to do anything, just sit there if you don't want to. Well, I was the Southern California's top long horse champion by the end of this second year, I think it was.
You should have told him that Perry Como was busy. He couldn't get a haircut.
They'd say, who?
I know. So you know what I love about you is that every time there's an obstacle, you just smash right through that door and conquer whatever's in your way. I love that. Whenever you get, it's like, nope, that's not going to work out. Go over here, and then you find something else you like with the printing, with the running. So I just love that.
Here's an oddball situation. I haven't thought about it until now, but I was given a creative writing class.
Mm-hmm.
So I hadn't thought about this because I did write something later, and I had a hard time with the creative writing class. I didn't write anything. I wrote one poem. I could recite it for you if you want, but it's a sweet poem. But I took everybody else's poems into the printing class, and I set the type, and I printed little booklets, and I called it ink spots. And all the class's poems. And I got a C in the class, and I only wrote one poem.
Well, you know what? Let's hear it.
There you go. I was sitting in class on the second floor, and you look out over the promenade at the school. It was like concrete, but it was with plants and everything. And it was so hot. It was like 95 degrees, as it can get in California. And the dust devils were swirling around the thing. And I thought, heat. It's appalling. A sensation of mauling when you try to concentrate. You get an idea, a lovely idea, but you lose your mind of state. As you can see, it has happened to me. And this prate, how can I end it? I'll put in a word, just any old word, in hope that you will not offend it. That was my poem.
It's impressive that you still remember that after all these years.
Yeah. It is, yes. I wrote, that's it. That's the only thing I wrote.
Until now. Now you have the book out.
Well, the book was just absolutely incredible. It wasn't as though I thought all my life I'm going to have to write my biography or anything, but Jeanie and I had this wonderful home up in Lake George. And I had this was wonderful space that looks out over the pool, and it was so good. I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. This is the last 3 years ago. And I get up at 4 o'clock and I put a pot of coffee on, and I go down to my space. And I had these composition books, you get in high school. Mm-hmm. I wrote the whole book by hand. I filled 12 of these books. And it just went, everything just came out. And it wasn't hard to do. It was beautiful to do. It was very cathartic. A lot of things that I had forgotten that I was remembering, and of course, so it took about 3 months and a year and a half to edit.
That's always the fun part.
Oh my gosh, yes. There were certain things in the book, like the poem. I wrote a whole thing about going to high school and joining the Sultans. I belonged to a club, that wonderful bunch of guys that I'm still in contact with.
Yeah.
I wrote there was a whole chapter on Hamilton High School and writing the poem, and I at one point taught the printing class because my teacher had a kidney operation, and I went in and I taught 3 classes a day. To keep the production going for the school, because they printed all the stuff for the school. It was a wonderful chapter and everything, but that whole chapter, it was not even put in the book. It didn't survive the book.
Yeah. Well, didn't your wife help you edit? I think you said you had 1,200 pages, if I'm correct.
Oh, she was invaluable, because she would read the story and say, out. Who cares? Out.
Frankly, I'm bored. Click next.
Well,
that's funny.
It's an interesting analogy when you said that you loved reading the book and that you breezed right through it. You couldn't. The challenge to something, particularly to a biography, an autobiography, is that you don't want to get hung up and say, "Oh, well, I'll finish this later." You want them to want to turn the page to the next story, and that's basically what our objective was. was to keep it going.
Yeah.
And
You have succeeded.
thank you. It's a wonderful book. Actually, your friend can put a copy of the front of the book up.
Yes. I will definitely make sure of that because I want everybody to read this book. All my viewers who are watching this right now, buy the book. It's a great book, very interesting. And as David said, it's a page turner. You do not want to put it down because I always want to see what's going to happen next because you have so many interesting stories in there. And one interesting story, unless you have something else to say about that.
Well, the whole concept of this the autobiography again is that everybody was telling me all autobiographies should start with chapter 2. I mean, I was born, and well, my actual chapter 1, that until I was into Peter Pan, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's more than 4 or 5 pages.
Yeah, you are correct.
It's very brief, and I don't get hung up on where I lived in the temple school that I went to, which.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what's great because we talked about that you said like it's not just you listening. I did this. You have so many stories to correlate with what you were doing at that time, and it doesn't even have to do with the entertainment business. We're going to get into the stories about your daughter, your granddaughter, your wife. So many interesting life stories. It's not only about the entertainment business. And another thing I wanted to talk about before we get into anything, it was that you and I talked about this off air, and I love the fact you did that. You took out any negative stories. You didn't put anything in there saying bad mouthing this person, because I know that's what a lot of publishers and a lot of readers like. But I personally love the positivity with this book.
Well, there wasn't all that much in it to start with.
Okay.
One, I've never had a vindictive life, so they would have been uninteresting. But there were some very, very funny stories that I tell that are off color.
Yeah.
And those were taken out too, because when you consider the book, it has got this positive 180 rule going right through it. It's inspirational for people who are young, and this is paying it forward. This is how the people learn. We didn't jump in and do something that just because we're there and we got to do it. We had to have a passion for all of the things that we did, and then put 180% into that passion. If we didn't have the passion, we probably wouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, love dancing. So, and I have to say, we were good at our job. We did, she's a brilliant dancer.
Yeah. No, make a great couple.
Yeah, you should have seen us on the dance floor. Well, of course we faked it. We improvised everything in jitterbug and mambos and sambas, but it was fabulous. We really looked good on the floor. So we decided we're going to take some lessons in New York City about how to do the Harvest Moon Ball proper dance so that we can go into competition. Well, we're ballet and we're turned out. Ballroom is pretty much turned in, and every time we would do something, we were always turning out, and you get points off if you're being judged. We couldn't do it. We spent a lot of money trying to learn it, but we couldn't. Our bodies wouldn't go that way. We couldn't turn our toes in. First position.
Even without that, I think you did very well.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Speaking of dance partners, though, I want to talk about one dance partner in particular, one Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, what a dance partner.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, talk about a sensuous woman. We were invited when Peter Pan ended and on Broadway, we televised the first live telecast of Peter Pan at NBC Studios in Brooklyn. Disney owned the film rights, so we had to do it live. The next year, 56, we were all called back to New York And we did it again, the second live telecast. After that live telecast, Cyril was invited out to Southampton, out in the Hamptons, for a week by Elaine Carrington, who actually is the mother of soap operas. She wrote most all the soap operas from the 40s on. Literally, she was prolific. She wrote a couple of Broadway plays and everything, but she had this estate, and it was just beautiful. And Cyril and I were invited out well, Cyril was invited out because I just pack a bag. I go with him. And we were there the first Saturday. We were all lounging around in the living room. She said, "Darling, I have a great surprise. I'm throwing a party tonight." And I could hear Cyril say, "Oh my God," because he was exhausted. And she said, "But you'll love the people." And he said, "Do I know them, dear?" And he said, "Well, I think you do." She said, "Well, there's Bloomgarten, the producer, a Broadway producer, and his wife. There's Eli Wallach and his wife, Ann Jackson, and Arthur Miller and his new wife, Marilyn Monroe." And she said, and of course, well, she kept on talking. That was all the people that were coming, right? But she kept on talking, and Cyril and I looked at each other, and we both said at the same time, "Marilyn?" And it was Marilyn Monroe. She waltzed into that front door. There's a big screen door coming into the foyer of that house. And she waltzed in that door like she owned the world. Mm-hmm. And she had this wonderful dress that was just a little sliver of thing that went all the way down to where it stopped by itself. And the back was cut out. So she was like gossamer. And of course, our hostess also invited a date for me. And Mimsy was my date. She was my same age, a neighbor that she had, and she came. So Mimsy and I were around pouring drinks for everybody and doing our bit and things like that. And she put on some music and some dance music and stuff like that. And Mimsy and I were dancing while Marilyn cut in. And we for the rest of the night, that's all we did was jitterbug and make noise. It was a spectacular night. I can't tell you. Mimsy was cute, but Marilyn was phenomenal.
Yeah, you made the right decision there. It's like, Marilyn, you can cut in at any time.
Yeah, I always thought Mimsy must have thought she was upstaged.
Maybe just a little. So Marilyn was very nice.
Oh, it's incredible and noisy. We didn't have anything to make noise with, so she came out the kitchen with pots and pans and spoons, and we played up and down the porch making pots and pan noises and doing. We got a call from the estate next door. And it was a half a mile away about the noise. It was wonderful.
That's funny. Another person that you met that I thought was very interesting was the son of General MacArthur.
Yes. One afternoon, Cyril said to me, Maddie had died, his wife, and he was doing a show out in California of television, and he came to our house, with my mom and dad, for dinner and everything, and he said, "How would you like to go to Hawaii?" I said, "Are you kidding? Sure.
Let's go."
So he said, "Good. Meet me at Saks Fifth Avenue in Hollywood." He said, "Because you can't go, we're going to a ball and you'll have to have a black tie." And so I had a white dinner jacket and the black, beautiful pants with the stripe up the edge and patent leather shoes. He decked me. I got dressed really, it's cool. And we went to this, we landed in Hawaii, in Honolulu and stayed at the Pink, the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. It's pink, it's still there. And during the day, I wanted to go do surfing and stuff like that, but I didn't know how. But we were just sitting on the beach, and then Cyril said, well, you stay here because I have to do an appointment, so and so. So I was sitting there, and this kid was one towel away from me, sitting there. It was General MacArthur's son. And we rented a car and we did the island. It was a fun day. Yeah. Never saw him again.
You've led a very interesting life, and it's still continuing. But now, on the West Side Story, because I mentioned in the intro, you achieved the rare feat of playing in top productions in both New York and London before the age of 20.
Yeah.
So, no, what I wanted to say was in the Broadway play, what role did you have?
Well, in the Broadway, I actually wasn't in the Broadway play.
Okay.
Jerry, when he was developing it in '56, just after we did the second telecast, I went back out to California. And Jerry called my agent and said, I'm putting together a show called West Side Story, and I want to see David. And my agent said to him, well, David's in California getting his diploma. He's not doing any shows until he graduates. What? He didn't ask me. And this was actually, I didn't even know about this until after, a couple of years after. And Milton Goldman was my agent, and he felt so bad because he turned the original Broadway show down for me. I was never charged by him for anything I ever did ever.
Wow.
And Jeanie. And he represented both of us for a lot of years. Yeah, but he really said about that. But so Jerry, I wasn't called for the auditions of West Side in New York. Within a year, he was, well, the show opened on Broadway, I think it was in December of '57, and they immediately were thinking of sending it to England, and they were putting together a cast. Well, by then I had been offered, Matty Gavers wanted me to join the ballet company at the Metropolitan Opera Ballet Company. And so I did, to go specifically, not to play the winter thing in New York, but to take the opera out on tour. We went to Central City Colorado for most of the summer. So I was in the ballet, but I had contracted for that. And by January, they were putting together the company for London, for West Side Story. And they wanted Cheetah to leave New York and go to London. Well, Cheetah had just gotten married in early December to Tony Mordente. And by February, she was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So that was postponed. She had the baby in July or June, and late June or July. And they started rehearsals in September. They started putting together. Well, by September, my contract was up with the Metropolitan Opera Company. And Jerry called my mother. Hello. He didn't call my agent. He called my mother. Where's David? He said, well, he just finished doing the Met, and he's right here beside me. You want to talk to him? And he said, I'm putting together West Side Story, and if you're available, fly to New York. Auditions start on Monday. I auditioned for 4 days. They were tough. It was a tough audition, but I just had a great time. I said, the hell with that, that's what I do. Yeah. And I got the part of Big Deal. Big Deal on Broadway was Marty Charnin. Marty Charnin later wrote Annie. He also wrote a Broadway show that I did with him called Hotspot with Judy Holliday. We did that on Broadway. And he also wrote the lyric for the musical. Alfred Drake, Cheetah Rivera, and it was the Rasendale. Do you know, I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, he wrote the lyric to this. So I actually did 3 shows with Marty. But strangely enough, I took his place in the London company. And Marty didn't dance. I did all the dancing. So when you think about any of the characters in West Side Story, anybody can say any of those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Action was a bigger part. He was the angry one. Baby John obviously had Baby John lines, but the rest of the script, anybody could have said anything.
Mm-hmm.
In London, I was Officer Krupke, like I was in the movie.
Yes.
On the tour, I did the London tour after the movie. Well, I sang Officer Krupke as opposed to being Officer Krupke. I sang it. So a lot of the characters in the play itself can be interchanged by anybody. When we did the Spielberg movie, and I was introduced to the chap that took Tiger, my spot in the movie.
Young Tiger.
Huh?
Young Tiger.
Yes, Young Tiger. When Jean and I were invited, Steven Spielberg, gracious man, he invited both Jean and I to the world premiere at the Lincoln Center in November, the first time it would ever be shown. And after the movie we were leaving the movie, I said to Jean, I don't recall seeing Tiger in the movie. He didn't do anything I did.
Mm-hmm.
But he was Tiger. It's interesting because you can, the way Jerry set this up is that if during rehearsals you say, well, it wouldn't hurt you to try. Oh, it hurts. Well, if the guy next to me did it better than me, he got it because it doesn't matter who says that line. And that's how I still have the original script from West Side Story from the London company, and all my notes are explicit as to how I have to say something, and on a couple of them they're crossed out because he gave it to somebody else. Interesting. And also there was also lines that were Joy Boy said this, and I had to cross out Joy Boy and put my big deal in because I would get his line.
Yeah.
So it had to do with what was appropriate, pretty much, and who said the line best.
I'm guessing he would not allow ad-libbing.
With one exception, in the movie, I think what made Officer Krupke much, much better than the Spielberg version was that we did everything I started off by saying, hey, you. Right after I say that, you hear, hey, who, ha, ha, hoo, hee, ho. Yeah, that was all ad-lib.
Okay.
And everything that we did in there, because all of us had done the play one time or another, it was mostly all spontaneous. Robert Wise, Jerry wasn't with us when we filmed that. Robert Wise was directing this, and he let us do whatever we wanted to. So it was spontaneous. In the movie, in Spielberg's movie, it was staged. And it looked, well, from my point of view, it just looked staged, and it was set in the wrong place. First of all, the Jets would never be in a precinct and sing that song. They did it in the precinct and there wasn't a cop in sight. That's just defies logic.
Yeah.
I thought, ooh, ours was so much better.
Well, speaking of Officer Krupke, I want to talk about this. There was some censorship on that song, G Officer Krupke in London. What was that about?
Actually, there wasn't they didn't actually change anything, but the magistrate, His Majesty regrets was the title that they had. They would go and edit or censor. It was a censorship, something that was established back in 1628, that they could censor anything appearing on stage in London. And they did that. Well, when West Side Story went over to London, all the, Arthur Lawrence and Jerome Robbins, I know basically both of them were at the meeting where his magistrate sat there and they had the script and he opened it up and they got to Krupke. And he said, my father is a bastard. My mom's an SOB. My grandpa is always plastered. My grandma pushes tea. He looks up and he said, what does pushing tea mean? He didn't say anything about the bastard and everything. And the only change they made in the entire script was when anybody had a line, you bet your big fat butt, right? They changed it to bet your big fat A.
They didn't care about bastard, but butt really gave them a problem.
Butt gave them a problem. They changed it to a fat A. That's the only change they actually made. Jerry was at that meeting, and I know this because we all sat around on a break during rehearsal once, and he described the whole thing to us.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Well, speaking of performing in London, I found this funny reading it in the book. Did you adhere to the protocol of what was expected with royalty?
Yes. You tell that to a bunch of teenagers. Before the royalty would come, we were all summoned to the stage and said, now, the king and queen and Princess Margaret, they'll all be coming in. He said, there is a way you greet them and what you do and what you do not do. You do not speak to royalty unless you are spoken to. You may answer if questioned, right? And so as they come to you, up to you, you do a small bow, the women curtsy, right? And if they don't put their hand out, you don't shake their hand, right? Right. So everybody understood the whole thing. Well, Princess Margaret was the first one to come down the line. And you see, everybody was reaching out saying, hey, how are you? How you doing? Nobody bowed. They all shook her hand. And it was hysterical. I thought, oh my gosh. I said, if the manager, we're going to get hell for this later. We knew.
You probably had a heart attack watching that happen.
Oh my God. Can you imagine? Because it was so out of protocol. We didn't do any of that. Nobody listened. And who was the prime minister at the time? Harold Wilson was the prime minister. And we were very gentlemanly like to him and his wife dropped her glove. And I picked it up and handed it to her. She did that, walked off. I said, that was rude. I said, the least you could do is say thank you. Right? It's bad luck.
My God.
You don't say thank you when someone picks up your glove and hands it back. Didn't know that. I was told this a little, because I was complaining to that wicked woman. She wouldn't say thank you. She wasn't going to say thank you because it would have been bad luck.
Well, it's funny with all the rude people in America right now. Maybe it's just people thinking it's bad luck. Maybe there's an explanation.
Yes.
That's funny. I want to talk about the London production still. And you were roommates with George Chakiris. He played Riff. You had some fun stories with him.
George was like my big brother. He's about 4 or 5 years older than I am. And I was 17 when we flew over to London. So basically, I had 3 older brothers. So George fit right in there. And he and I were really close. We did everything. We studied, we took Shakespeare classes, we took singing lessons, we took as many dance classes as we could find. but we went to museums, and we went to, on Sunday night, we went to the theater. You see the melodramas and stuff like that. It was just wonderful. We went to see a melodrama. I don't remember what it was, but in the interval, you go outside and they would make you a cup of tea. And there was a rail along the wall that you put your tea on, your cup, and put your sugar and your cream, and then you turn around and drink your tea, and while everybody's sort of standing around, right? Well, George and I were stirring our tea. We finished turning our tea, and we turned around, and there was Rex Harrison and Kay Kendall standing in front of us, directly looking right into nose to nose. Oh, and they had seen the play, and they just wanted to say how wonderful they thought it was. But oh, Kay Kendall is just drop dead gorgeous.
Yes.
And Rex Harrison's very tall.
You just run into everybody throughout your life. I love it.
It was really cool. Kay Kendall did a movie with Gene Kelly called Lay Girls.
Okay.
It's a beautiful, it takes place in Paris, and Gene Kelly has this dance team, the three girls that back him up, and he's a dancer, and he does this nightclub act, and they're very successful. But the story's about the three girls, right? And I said to Gene, I said, the movie is, this was the time where you would go anywhere into a video store and buy videos. They have video shops all over. Like, I went in and I said to Gene, I said, I'm going to see if I can't find this movie for you. And so I went in and I said to the man, I said, I'm looking for a movie called Lay Girls. And I described the whole thing to him. He's gone 20 minutes. I said, he comes back, he said, Mr. Bean, I can't find any porn movies called Lay Girls. Those are all the porn books.
That's funny. In your lifetime, did you ever have a chance to meet Gene Kelly?
Never.
Yeah.
Oh, Donald O'Connor. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Gene and I did the Tonight Show. Jack Parr had a riff with the network, and he left the show. This is in 62 or 62. And he left the show, but the show kept on. And Donald O'Connor that night was the guest host. And Gene and I had a number, America from West Side.
Yeah.
Danya Krupska, the wonderful choreographer, choreographed a number for Gene and I for the Tonight Show that we performed of America, but the setting is in American supermarket, and it's British. I like to be in America, not with an accent, but with a British accent. And it was a good number. We did it on, I think there was a show called, was it Talent Scouts with Ed McMahon had? We did it on that also.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that after, but yeah, I did read about that in the book.
Talent Search?
Talent Scouts is what it was called.
Was it?
Yeah, with Ed McMahon as the host.
And I would have loved to see it, but I can't find it.
I was going to ask you, so even the Donald O'Connor one, you cannot find on YouTube at all? Neither can, because Talent Scouts I never heard of. I knew Ed McMahon, obviously, from the Tonight Show, and also Talent Search, I think it was called, or Star Search was what he did later on. Yes.
Okay, Star Search, that's the one we were on.
Okay. Because in the book, you talk about Talent Scouts, which was Ed McMahon hosting as well.
I do?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a faux pas.
Okay, well, didn't mean to point out any mistakes.
Oh, wow. What is that?
So it was Star Search.
Star Search.
Okay, yeah, that show I remember. It was in the 80s, I think.
Okay, then it wasn't Star Search. This was in 62.
All right, so that was Talent Scouts. No faux pas in the book.
63, I think, because Gene was doing. Gene got a wonderful part in The Boys from Syracuse, the revival at Theater 4 off Broadway. It was a wonderful show. God, she was so good in it. And one night, Jean got a note backstage saying that David O. Selznick would like to have you make an appointment to see him at his hotel whenever you can. So Milton Goldman, my agent, and Cyril, and I, and supposedly Jean, we were married by this time, were in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, seeing downstairs in a little theater, they were showing Alfred Hitchcock's first directorial job on a movie called Blackmail, which Cyril was the villain. And he plays the piano and sings. It's very funny. I mean, and of course, you see Hitchcock get on a bus.
Mhm.
Did it from the very first go, right? Well, we were sitting there getting ready to watch the film, and we were waiting for Jean because Jean had this appointment with David O. Selznick. That he was forming a new stable of actors in Hollywood. He was going to create a new studio, and he was interested in Jean. And so just before the movie starts, here Jean's late. She comes in the thing. She said, "Jean, how did it go?" She said, "Oh, it was wonderful. I met his wife, Jennifer Jones." He said, "Oh, it was so wonderful." And he did it. And Milton didn't know. He said, "And who were you seeing?" And Jean said, "I just had an interview with David Susskind." I said, "Who?" David Susskind. He's doing a whole new thing in Hollywood. I mean, David Susskind is doing a whole new thing. She got the name wrong.
Oh, that's funny. Speaking of fun, there's so many stories in this book that made me laugh out loud. One of them that made me laugh out loud was about your Welsh tenor giving you singing lessons. Tell me how you misunderstood what you thought was his cue to project.
Oh, well, you said, first of all, he was a Welsh tenor, and he sat like this all the time, just sitting up like this. You need to listen and listen. He said, "No, no, no. I want it to come out." She said, and so within weeks, several of us were taking singing lessons from this Welsh tenor, and we were all standing around backstage before the show, and we were going, It wasn't until 6 months later we figured out that this was not a resonance thing that he was doing, but he was holding in his upper plate. Because if he go his mouth, the plate would fall down, and the thing.
That's funny.
And he would say to Mrs. Brown, and she would play the piano. It was very funny.
Yeah, that was just one of the many stories that made me laugh. I want to talk about your tour of Europe, and you had a fellow jet, another actor, Eddie Verso.
Eddie Verso was just a brilliant dancer. He went over to London playing Baby John. So he was a fellow jet. And Eddie and Don and all the kids. But I bought a car while I was there. I bought a 59 Wolseley and had a left-hand drive made for it and everything. It was a typically British little family car. It was a cute little thing. And we drove all over the place. We had such a great time. The little over a year we were playing in the West End. Eddie was a brilliant dancer. Every night, Jerome Robbins would require everybody to be on stage a half hour before half hour to take a small class and warm up. Because if you didn't warm up, you could get hurt in that show very easily, because it was a tough show to do dance-wise. So Eddie and Jean, when Jean eventually joined the company, Eddie and Jean would be doing these ballet combinations. They did the Bluebird variation from the Swan, it was just spectacular. What this kid has such a beautiful dance. We both left the show the same day. We got into my car, drove it onto a little airplane, I'm not kidding. Drove the car onto the airplane and it flew us to Belgium. We got out of the car. We didn't know where we were going. We just took off. We spent 6 weeks doing Europe, Eddie and I, like this. And we got back to London and there was a cable from Jerry Robbins for Eddie saying, come back, we need to do a screen test for you. We're doing a movie of West Side Story. Well, I didn't get one. So I stayed a couple of weeks with Jean and eventually I got on the USS United States and took a slow boat back to New York. And when I got to New York, Milton Goldman goes, where have you been? He said, Jerry Robbins is looking for you again. You have to go out to California to do a screen test. But Eddie and I are very close. And when Eddie got to, it was like George. Both Eddie and George in the London production were Jets. They were my brothers. When we got to Hollywood, Eddie became a shark. He played Wano. George became Bernardo.
Ah.
I'm not allowed to talk to him. But that was,
Yeah.
from the original, and I know this is a fact, from the very original Broadway production, Jerry wanted all the Jets and the Sharks to do, Jets are here, Sharks are here, and be very careful. When we were doing the movie, you wanted to be very careful that you didn't walk alone. Because if you turned around a corner and there were 5 sharks, they'd pants you. Yeah, not terrible stuff, but fun, nasty things. They'd pull your pants off and you'd have to walk someplace because they'd take your pants.
Yeah. Well, wasn't there something too? I think it was with the movie now, where if you were caught hanging, like you as a Jet were caught hanging out with the Sharks, you would have to pay for everybody's food.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
This goes back to George. Now, George and I were really very close. I mean, he was like a brother to me. In London, I sat with him during, he made an album, George on George. He sang all George Gershwin's songs. And we did everything together. I mentioned this, I'm being redundant now. But we were very close, just like brothers. And we got to Hollywood and I wasn't allowed to associate with him. And in Hollywood, it's wonderful making movies. You don't work Saturday and Sunday unless you're on location. So Sunday, George called me up. He said, what are you doing? I said, nothing. He said, well, Rita's here. We're going to have, I know one of your favorite meals is spaghetti and meatballs. So we're having spaghetti and meatballs and Rita's boyfriend's here. And we're all going to go to the movies. We're going to go see The Seventh Seal, artsy film. I said, okay. I said, but if this is the one playing on Hollywood Boulevard, I said, anybody from the studio come and you got to hide me because I don't want to pay $1,200 for breakfast for the whole crew.
No.
Which is what it was. And so they said, oh, okay, agree. So we went over there. We had our spaghetti and meatballs and we all take off to the movie. And which I absolutely didn't understand a word of it. That Bergman was far beyond me. And we got, nobody bothered to sit in line going into the movie. So it was a safe night. But Rita Moreno's boyfriend, by the way, was Marlon Brando. So
did you, what did you think of him? You said in the book he was very quiet.
Unbelievably so. Yeah, he hardly spoke. He nodded his head a lot, but I don't remember anything that he actually said. Maybe it's because we were demonstrative and between Rita and me and George, the conversation was full. I don't know, Rita was wonderful.
Well, I was going to say, it seems like an odd match because just from what I can tell in interviews and seeing her in movies, Rita seems like she's full of life, happy, fun. Marlon, on the other hand, maybe it's just his image, but he always seemed like he was brooding, angry, not a lot of fun. I mean, I don't know if that's the real Marlon Brando behind the scenes, but
It depends on what time in his career too, because
yeah,
I'm sure there were times when he was a little more pensive than not. His whole career is a bell curves. It's full of bell curves.
yeah. Well, speaking of Rita, I want to talk about her since we're speaking about her now. She's an EGOT. What's an EGOT?
EGOT is where you're a winner of all of the awards, a Tony Award, a Grammy Award,
The Oscar,
the actors,
Oscar and Tony.
and the Oscar and the Tony, right?
Yeah, she's very, very impressive. And I love how with the new one, I love how Spielberg did that. And he made her the wife of the shop owner and gave her a part in that movie too.
And she also sang the Somewhere.
Yes. Now in the original movie, did she do her own singing?
Natalie, no, Marnie Nixon did a few of the high notes for her, but that's not well known.
Okay. So for the most part, she sang.
Sang,
songs.
it's
Okay.
all her voice. There was a couple of them where she had real high notes and Marnie stepped in and did them.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because as I mentioned, I just rewatched the movie the other night and listening to Natalie Wood, the high notes. Now I was like, I could see it now, but I never would have known if I didn't read your book that it was somebody else singing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rita, but she was insanely wild.
Yeah, that's the image. I mean, that's the image she projects. I can picture her being like that. Seemed like a lot of fun.
I hope that I convey that because she was.
Yes.
Absolutely, a lot of fun.
Speaking of fun, we're at this part in the book, and I want to talk about the lovely and eternally beautiful Jean Deeks. We mentioned her several times. It's the woman of your dreams. Let's talk about her right now, because she also has a very interesting story, and you go into it a little bit.
Well, basically, when we were in London, if any of the kids brought over from New York to do the London production were to leave the show, they had to be replaced by a Brit. That's the equity rules.
Mhm.
And I was Eddie Roll, who was in the original Broadway version of West Side, and his wife was my dance partner in the dance hall. She was one of the Jet girls, and she got pregnant and had to leave the company, and Jean took her place. So next thing you know, I'm dancing with this really hot young Brit girl, and all of us, I'm not kidding, this is God's truth. All the guys thought, wow, she must be so busy. She's drop dead gorgeous, but she must be so. We didn't bother. It took 3 months for me to remember her name because we didn't talk. We didn't, it didn't hit on her, like we should have. And every night, this is a wonderful story. Every night, in the interval, Eddie Roll, who played action, and I would go downstairs, and little Jimmy, the stagehand, would make a cup of tea, give him threepence, and he'd make a cup of tea. And we'd sit at this bench with this little table in front of us, right? And on the other end of the bench, way down here, was Jean, this Jean Deeks. Right? I'd say, hey, gorgeous. I couldn't remember her name. Hey, gorgeous, how you doing? She said, oh, I'm doing really good. I said, hey, what are you doing Friday night? She said, no, I'm very busy. How about Saturday? I said, nah. I said, well, I'm booked up, right? And then Eddie would come and sit down, which cut off our prattle, We did this, well, she joined the company in August. We probably did this right up through September, August, September, into October. And one night, I'm busy. I'm booked up on Saturday. It was the same pattern we did every night, right? It was him. Eddie didn't show up one night. And now we're looking at each other and saying, You really want to know what I'm doing this weekend? I'm not doing anything. I'm home. I cleaned the flat. She said, well, if you leave a key under the mat, I'll wake you up with a cup of tea and give you a hand.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
The rest is history.
Yeah. And she did clean my flat, and I cooked her a leg of lamb that night. I'm big on lamb, right? And I drove her home, met her parents. It was on the up and up. It was cool.
Wow. Right from the very beginning. I love it.
Right from the beginning. Yeah.
Well, tell me how you literally fell for her. You sprained your ankle.
Oh, yeah. Well, the first night that she took Inger's place, it was da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you jump way up like this. Well, she was in the wrong place. When I came down, she was there, and I turned my ankle, and literally, of all the time, with one exception, when I jumped off the 9-foot fence in the rumble, my knee came up and dislocated my jaw. But outside of that, I've never hurt. She sprained my ankle. I didn't speak to her for 3 months, 3 weeks. Anyway, I was so angry. This is before she made me a cup of tea.
Yeah.
But that actually happened. The first night I danced with her, she was in the wrong place, and I came down on her foot, twisted my ankle.
That's fine. Well, you have a history. First, you break. I didn't even get into this one, but you broke Captain Hook's toe.
Yes.
You sprained your ankle with her.
But that when we were doing Peter, this was during the second telecast in '56 in the NBC, and I had flown to New York, and I was staying with Cyril. Maddie was, I think, in Australia. But so Cyril and I had to fend for ourselves. So he would make breakfast, and then I would do the dishes, right? Well, I got fed up with that, and I said, well, why don't I do this? And we can switch. So one morning he said, all right, Beast. He called me the Beast. All right, you Beast, in there, do the dishes. I said, I did them yesterday. He said, you did not. I said, I did them yesterday. And he got me into a headlock, right? Taking me into the kitchen, right? Well, he was 6'4", he weighed a lot, right? I picked him up, right? And we fell backwards, and he broke his big toe. I'm not kidding. It turned the most beautiful colors you've ever seen in your life. It was awful. And we didn't know what to do. So we got in a car and drove to Brooklyn. Old Chrysler, the one we took out. And they had that spray. They got that spray where it numbs the thing.
Yep.
That numbed it so he could at least put his boot on, right? And in the middle of the ship scene where he and all the pirates, they rip up her gusset and down her sash and slash her aft and fore, then puffs the finger bowl Charlie. We'll all dip our hands in the gore. Well, Mary Martin is hiding in the ship's case, and she jumps on dressed as a pirate, jumps on one of the pirates' backs. And this is dress rehearsal now, the day of the performance, but it's the first full-blown dress rehearsal. And Mary jumps off this guy's back right onto his toe.
Oh.
Well, needless to say, the production stopped.
I can imagine.
Well, how fortuitous it was that happened, because when she did that, it busted the blood clots that formed under his nail. It released all the pressure and the pain, and in the rest of the show, he was without pain.
Wow. See, so it worked out for the best.
Well, for me. Your fault. My fault.
Well, I want to get back to your wife, because we were talking about her. She seems like, I met her once. She seems like she has just a great sense of humor like you do. And I want to talk to you about the BBC and how her dad worked for them. I love this.
Her dad was a clever man. Well, Gene won the Royal Scholarship, which is a 5-year scholarship to the Royal Academy when she was 11 years old in ballet. And she was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant dancer. I can't emphasize that enough. And all her primary grade school and everything, she would go to school, and at 10 o'clock she'd leave and then go to the Royal Academy and work till 5 dancing, right? The story about her dad, what was that one?
BBC.
Right.
It's an
Well,
acronym.
right. The key is that all these upper class mothers with all these prim little girls where, you know, in the Royal Ballet, where, I mean, Jean's mom and dad were Cockneys. She said, "Yeah, Matt," he said, I'm not going up there to see, you know, nah, here's your boots, and we go, right? So Jean was always by herself during this whole time. However, she had one key. And where does your daddy work? She said, "Oh, the BBC." Really? Oh, lovely. No, you know, so she had that coming. It actually stood for the British Bath Company.
I love it.
Toilets. And it was terribly funny. But he was the man that kept the plant running. I'm not kidding. There wasn't anything this man could not make. Across the tracks behind her house was Lion's Tea. So on Tuesday, they did coffee. You knew it was Tuesday because you could smell the coffee brewing, right? On Thursday, the BBC melted, you know, all the metal that they got. The carloads, the trains would pull them, carloads of steel and everything because they had to make these baths. Well, they melted all that steel down and then poured the baths in these sand things. It was one hell of an operation, and Dad kept that plant running. If something broke down, you didn't say, "Oh, I need a part 30466." He made it.
Wow.
He made it. When at the end of doing the movie, I had been called into Robert Wise's office. This story is continuing. And he said, "Now that you've finished the movie, what are your plans?" And I said, "Well, I've been offered to go back to London and to do the show again and take it out on tour of England, of West Side Story." He said, "Really?" I said, "Well, what do you got in mind?" He said, "Well, I have 2 movies that I'm doing." He said, "One is a Western." I said, "Oh, I'll stop you right there, Bob. Have you ever seen me on a horse?" I said, "I look like crap on a horse. You don't ever want me in one of your Westerns." The other, he said, "It's a war movie with Steve McQueen called The Sand Pebbles. There's a good part in that for you if you want it." Well, at that time, we could look back and think, well, I was really thinking with my hormones because I turned it down.
Yeah.
And I flew back to London to do the tour with Jean, which lasted the entire year of 61, which was our courtship. We were married in 62. Yeah. But it was brilliant. She played anybody's, and I played action in the play.
Yeah. Well, you never know what might have happened with Steve McQueen, but I think your life turned out very well.
I'm not unhappy about that. No.
Yeah. It's funny because I recently read a biography on Steve McQueen, and I watched that movie because they were talking about that movie. I probably saw it about 2-3 months ago. Never saw it before. So, you know, everybody knows Bullet and Great Escape, Papillon. I said, let me check out the Sand Pebbles. It was a good movie. I could definitely, I mean, I could probably picture you in that, even if horse or no horse.
No horse. Oh God. Well, later in our life, after spending 3 years in New York, Jean and I found a house in Westchester, which was 48 miles north of New York City.
Yeah.
And we bought a house there and started building businesses while we were dancing. You know, if we had a passion for something, we actually did it. and it was really a lot of fun. I'm good with the numbers, and there isn't much that I can't do with my hands. So technically, the process was just huge and so exciting. And of course, Jennifer was born in '66.
Yeah.
So that changed our life a lot. But ultimately, we came up north in 1979 and bought a farm.
Mhm.
This is where the continuation of the horses. They didn't like me. Horses don't like me. We had 5 horses, all for the girls. I fed those horses. I dug ditches for them to have water year round. I did. I mean, they treated me badly. They didn't like me at all. So I didn't ride them. I just took care of them for the girls.
That's funny. I would definitely want to get into all the businesses and all the things you've done post West Side Story. I want to go back into West Side Story for just a little bit. What was it like working with musical director Saul Chaplin?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I didn't know who Saul Chaplin was. He was a tall, I think he was in his late 50s, maybe in his 60s by this time. And he was just a genuine fun guy to be around. And unfortunately, I should have, well, at that time, if you could have Googled him, it would have been an eye opener, because this man has, what, 4 Oscars that he's won for the movies that he's done and the music that he's put on. The guy's credits are just enormous. He's huge in Hollywood. Yeah. And I didn't know this. And I worked with, Jerry had said, Jerry and Robert Wise decided that they wanted someone to sing the Jet song instead of Russ. Russ recorded it. They thought, well, David, go work with Saul Chaplin for a few days and then record the Jet song. And then Tucker Smith, you do the same thing. So one week I worked on it and I recorded it, and then Tucker Smith worked on it and recorded it. And I happened to be in the room when they replayed my recording to Jerry Robbins and Robert Wise. And they listened to the whole thing. And Jerry looked at Robert Wise and said, well, hell, he sounds just like Russ. And said, well, that was the point. I was supposed to sound like Russ, right? Yeah. And they used Tucker's.
Yeah.
In the movie, it's Tucker Smith's voice you hear only on the Jet song.
Oh, really?
Russ sings Krupke, he sings all the rest. Anything else you hear him sing, it's him.
Yeah.
And I thought he sang the Jet song just as good as any of us did. So I don't know what their problem was.
I'm curious about this. How many takes did each dance sequence take to film?
A lot.
A lot. Yeah. Well, Jerry seems like a perfectionist. From just what I read in the book, I can't imagine just like you said, you have to be there a half hour before a half hour. I mean, that was to avoid getting hurt. I understand that, but just that he wanted everything exactly the way it was. And I don't blame him. If you want quality, you have to work at it. And sounds like he made you work.
Well, also Jerry was a little bit of a fanatic about certain things, and we would shoot something on the street, on 63rd Street, right? Where the Lincoln Center is now. They left all the stumps of the buildings for us, and we would film a length of film. And Jerry said, "All right, we're going to do it again." And Bob Wise said, "Well, that looked perfect to me." So he said, "Well, just for sure." And then we do it a couple more times. And there's a story about where Jerry said, "Now I want you to do this whole thing all over again, only this time do it on the left foot."
Yes.
That's not true. You can't. He would never ask anybody to do that. 2, think about it. It would take 4 days of rehearsal to switch a whole sequence of dance movements onto another, on the opposite foot. You can't just, it's not ping pong. It would never happen. And Russ, when you and I met in New Jersey not long ago, we had dinner and Russ was sitting at the table, and I said, "Russ, I don't know where you got that story, but it could never have happened. It never happened to me." He said, "Well, it did happen to me, and you're in that same film."
I don't know.
But
Everybody has their own memory of what happened.
they tell the story enough, they believe it. It's a
Yeah.
similar story to about Jerry, because most dancers were terrified of him because he could be really cruel. If you did something that he didn't like, he was cruel. And the Ballets USA, they were all dancing on stage and they were standing in the back, and Jerry was in front admonishing them for something, and he was walking backwards, and he stepped and fell into the orchestra pit, and the cast just turned and walked off stage. They didn't go get him. No, I don't believe that happened.
Yeah.
I think that's just a wonderful story, because it's just sounds like something that could happen with Jerry, because they would all walk off the stage. And not run.
Exactly. It's
But
more.
the dancers would have jumped over into the pit to help him. It never didn't happen. It's just a great story.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes for a great story, and it sounds plausible or possible, but yeah, just from what you're telling me, but I agree with you.
And
They
that's
would have
a
been
long
like, yeah,
drop. You know, that's 9-foot drop. You're not gonna survive it.
oh yeah, that too, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it didn't happen.
Yeah. See, that's why I love talking to you. You tell me exactly how it really is. Nope, Rich, that's not true. All my viewers are getting a treat right now, saying all the facts behind the myths.
Well, so one of the big things about working when we were doing the prologue in New York City, where the Lincoln Center is now, when we would shoot a shot, and then they would say, all right, that's a wrap. So everybody now has to go sit down for a couple hours while they reset up another shoot, another scene. Well, we're a bunch of guys that one, were kept apart, and two, we had to do something. So we did rain dances. We'd stand in this middle of the street and just make up things and make it. And every time we did it, it would rain. Somebody was blaming us for the overtime that they had to put in because it was raining. And every time we'd start a rain dance, they'd tunnel us and put us and lock us on the bus. More rain dances, no more rain dances. And it was funny. Up on the Upper East Side, 110th Street at the playground.
Yeah.
There's a school playground there. And we used that for the very beginning of the prologue. There were problems with the gangs up there because that was territory. And the company that were really smart, they hired them. And they guarded us. And it was really cool because we, half hour before half hour.
Yep.
Well, here's a bunch of hoodlums, standing on the middle of the street, holding on to doing a ballet bar in the middle of New York City. Come on, these guys are saying, yeah, you're tough, but I don't know what that is. I said, how do you? And the wonderful question was, several of them asked us, how do they join our gang?
That's funny.
How do they get into our gang?
That's a genius move, though. Hire the gang as security. So
Yeah.
they're going to leave you alone. They're getting paid. They're happy.
They ate with us, everything.
Yep.
And even up on 110th Street, one of the guys leaning against a fence said something nasty and he got stabbed.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the two directors right now. The dynamic between Robert Wise and Jerry Robbins. I want to talk about the dynamic between the two of them because they both seem like very different ends of the spectrum, meaning Robert seemed like he was more laid back. Jerry was more like, let's do it like this. I don't care. And so how did the two of them get along?
Unbelievably well. And it was respect. I mean, think about this. Robert Wise edited Orson Welles' first movie with Citizen Kane. I mean, he goes back. His credentials are huge. Jerry and Robert Wise had the utmost respect for each other. And that was really smart on Jerry's part because Jerry didn't know anything about making movies. He only knew what he knew in his heart and what he could see. And when he took that little thing and they wore him around their neck, they were always looking Jerry went overboard with respect to, let's do it this way, let's do it this way, let's do it this way. We were only supposed to be, I think, 6 or 7 weeks in New York, and we were 16.
Wow.
I think that's what it was.
Wow.
I could be wrong with those numbers, but it was huge. We were way over budget.
Was there ever a time where the studio were thinking of canceling the movie, saying you're way too over budget, we can't afford this?
Now available in one collection. Confessions of a Frenetic Mind. 5 tales of blood-curdling terror. Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.